right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order for roll call, appointments of alternates. Charlie, if you'd like to serve for our opening spot, one of them. We have no public hearings this evening, so we move on to item 4, old business applications. The first application is application number 17-21, Robert and Stephanie Carroll, owners for the construction of a 2-story addition to the existing residence on the property located at 62 West Mountain Road, West Simsbury, Assessor's Map B11, Block 406, Lot 012, Zone R40. Good evening. And would you like to... Yes, all right. Would you like to present your applications? Identify yourself and present your application. Give us a little description of what you'd like to do.
Oh, I thought you already handled that.
We do, but if you'd like to come and just tell us a little bit more about it.
Sure. I'm confused about a 2-story addition.
Yes.
We'd like to put a 2-story addition on the house?
Okay, so let's look at the application.
Put the 2-story addition on the south side of the house.
And just for the record, you are, your name?
Robert Carroll.
Okay, thank you.
Stephanie Carroll.
Thank you. Just so it's picked up on the tape.
Sure, absolutely. So I think on the application should show that we added onto our home backing away. We went through the Wetlands Commission. We added on a garage, which was closer to the water than what we were planning on adding on now. So we're well acquainted with the process.
So this is above the existing garage, or?
No,
where-
this is a different part of the house.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think that's shown on the plan. Is it?
Exhibit 2 should have assumed on
Oh, we don't
This-
have
We don't have
Okay, I
that.
will, I can copy this for you. They're doing it in addition to the southern elevation of the existing house. The material will be removed. They've identified silt fencing within the lawned area. It's a minimum disturbance associated with it. They've provided, should when you encounter a construction narrative. I will make a copy of this right now.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the construction narrative.
Just a second, I will make those copies right now for the board. Everything is, there's no activity in the wetlands. Everything is roughly approximately 59 feet from the edge of mapped wetland soils. There's a Saxon Brook goes right through, or Stratton Brook, I'm sorry, runs right through the property. The wetland soils, according to the official map, identified as floodplain soils on this property. They're very poorly drained. The area adjacent to the house is a real sandy soil. Erosion, although we required silt fence around this and there's no limited grading, should not be an issue because of the sandy nature of the soils where the existing house is. Topo kind of runs to the rear of the property. This should be a minor addition, provided Bob and his wife follow the conditions of approval and construction notes, which I'll read. Construction notes: the silt fence will be set up 20 feet from the construction to ensure no runoff into wetlands. In addition to all fill will immediately be removed from the property to an off-site location. We've completed a previous addition on our home several years ago, received wetlands approval. The project was much closer and properly managed with the proper precautions executed. The addition that they previously came for in 2008 was to the north of the original homestead. That was for a garage. It was approximately 40 feet from the edge of mapped wetland soils. After reviewing the construction file and visiting the site, they followed their plans to the T in 2008. We really didn't have any issues, and suspect if they follow the plans as they kind of outlined tonight, this shouldn't be an issue with this construction.
Did you have a staff report for
I
this?
did. You should have the staff report in front of you. I put some conditions of approval, special conditions of approval that they probably reviewed.
Yeah.
You guys are okay with? And it's just, a lot of it is mirroring what they've said they were going to do. Fill being removed from the site, asking that staff review and approve the location of silt fencing so that we know that the erosion sediment control measures are in place, so there will not be an adverse effect, and that the approval is really for work within the upland review area. And just to restate it, that no authorization has been granted for work within mapped wetland soils, and work beyond this will be considered a violation of the permit and subject to an immediate enforcement action. And just the standard conditions of approval with that.
When do you hope to do this project?
A month ago.
Does anyone have any questions?
I would repeat the comment I made as to an application last week, that the regulations require more information than we've been given. Nonetheless, I don't think this is a problem in this case, and we should proceed.
Did you have extra information to give us, or?
Just what I explained, I can make a copy of the construction narrative for everyone. And I apologize, this came in prior, obviously, to the last meeting.
And last time, we went ahead.
We did?
And how do you feel about going ahead again?
I repeat, I think we should go ahead.
Yeah.
All right, all right. Would anyone care to make a motion?
I move that it's a regulated activity as it involves construction in the upland review area.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Move that the commission find that it's not a significant activity as it involves no direct impact nor portends any damage to the wetlands.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And I move that the commission grant the permit subject to the special and standard conditions in the staff report, with which the applicant is familiar. Okay.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Yes, your application's done, yes. All right, moving on to item B, application number 17-22 of the LRC Group, agent for St. Mary's Church Corporation, owner for the construction of an addition to the existing church and school and associated site improvements on the properties located at 940 Hop Meadow Street, Assessors Map H09, Block 227, Lot 001, 942 Hop Meadow Street, Assessors Map H09, Block 227, Lot 001, Assessors Map H08, Block 227, Lot 002, 948 Hop Meadow Street, Assessors Map H09, Block 227, Lot 002, and 950 Hop Meadow Street, Assessors Map H09, Block 227, Lot 002, Zone SC-1. Good evening.
Is that an appropriate place for my easel and board, or how do you like that? Spot? My name is Henry Thomas. I'm a landscape architect and principal with the LRC in Conrail. We are the site design, civil engineering, landscape architecture consultants to the church on the proposed project. With me here tonight is Rich Reynolds, who's our staff engineer, and Martin Grohe, who is our environmental wetlands consultant. We'll give you a relatively brief overview of the project, and to the extent you want more information, let me know and I'll be happy to give it to you. St. Mary's has put forth a proposal to construct an addition that serves both the school and the church, and in fact would be sited between the two. And so it is space that can flow both ways and serve both functions. It's a two-story addition that will be more directly connected to this side and rear entrance to the church. If you know, there's a stairway door at the very back. And from the church's perspective, what the addition does is facilitate a lot of accessibility that doesn't currently exist. So within the addition will be an elevator that allows accessibility to the basement, which currently doesn't exist. It also allows some renovation in here to put a bathroom at this level, making it accessible in the church. So there is a parish life center where after-church activities would occur. On the second floor is the parish offices and a reading room / library and another multi-purpose room that can be a classroom of different sorts. So during the week, the school will use some of those spaces, and obviously in evenings and weekends, the church will use some spaces. At the school, it is connected by just a single connector corridor on the ground floor. So main entrances to that addition are on the Hot Meadow Street side. There's also one on the back side, and then a couple of doors into this connector that are the primary ones where the school would get access. Related to that, or because of that, if you know the existing site, right now that's all paved parking. We're reconfiguring the front to be a drop-off with very limited parking, reconfiguring the back to improve the dimensions so that it can work as a two-way drive and at 90 degrees. And perhaps most noticeably, we've called for a connector drive at the back of the school, which allows connection between the north and the south parking areas. What this facilitates is that bus traffic and parent traffic will all be on the north side and all be taking advantage of the light in terms of exiting during the day. Much like there's a gate here, there would be a gate there once school is open. But in the morning, parent traffic would go here, bus traffic would go here, and that relieves a lot of the traffic out of these two curb cuts. Although it looks very similar to the current configuration in terms of paved area, a lot of the pavement has to get touched in terms of connecting up grades and meeting floor elevations and so on. Back here, we've added a little bit of pavement to facilitate this driveway and complete this parking area. We've picked up a few parking spaces back here. So there's a little pruning and trimming all the way around. From a stormwater standpoint, we've made this a net zero kind of a project. The reason that we're before you today is that there is a large body of wetlands that predominantly is on the Westminster Schools property, but there is, I think it's 390 square feet of wetland right here, which happens to be at the base of a drainage outlet that is primarily a discharge for the state of Connecticut. So that easement's been there a very long time. It's a 36-inch pipe and an outlet that goes into the wetlands, the majority of which is elsewhere. The regulated area is back here, so we do skirt the regulated area with part of our driveway. And within the wetland itself, there's, as I said, there's a 36-inch pipe or a series of 36-inch pipes and a concrete head wall that its current condition is overturning. So the head wall itself is tilting and degrading, and the last section of pipe has gotten to the point where it's disconnected, and the flow line is no longer a flow line. So in a high volume event, yes, water is going through the pipe. In a low volume event, it's going under and around and so on. So right now there's a state of erosion happening around the edges. There is substantial amounts of sediment, because at the time that this was implemented, which honestly I don't know, it's probably been 50 years, there were no other measures at the outlet other than to let the water go. So there's substantial amounts of sediment. And what we're proposing is really a repair and improvement job, which is replace the head wall, replace the last section of pipe, and actually construct a plunge pool to be able to capture some sediment and remove the sediment that we can already identify, but also build a plunge pool so that it actually works more effectively and improve the flow line so we don't have scouring going around it. We'll come back to the wetlands in a minute if you'll bear with me. Are you interested in hearing about stormwater, how we're doing other things? Okay. I'm going to let Rich explain some of our systems.
Good evening, my name is Rich Reynolds, I'm with the LRC.
Yes.
So in front of the proposed building connector, we're proposing to do a small parking area. And within that parking area, we're going to do some underground storage, plastic chambers that are going to control the rainwater that comes into that area. There's a few catch basins that we're going to be adding to collect the water and put it into that underground retention. All of the water actually runs from west to east towards Iron Horse Boulevard. So we're trying to maintain that same flow pattern with our proposed drainage. This back section here, we're proposing a retaining wall for this access drive in the back. So rather than put the stormwater below grade, which would impact the retaining wall, we're going to use some oversized drainage pipes to retain some of that stormwater with an outlet structure. All of the water will continue to flow towards that Iron Horse Boulevard. All of the proposed improvements attenuate the 100-year storm and all the storm events. So essentially that's the drainage. The roof leaders and everything are connected to existing drainage systems. There's yard drains throughout the property. I think over the years they've added yard drains. But all of that flow ends up in the drainage system at Iron Horse Boulevard and then down into this wet area. Like Henry mentioned before, this area here where we're going to do the improvements of the concrete head wall, it does take some of the drainage from our site, but a majority of the drainage comes from the state highway. That's the simple version. If you have any questions.
Those underground retention
Yes.
structures, are they merely that, or are there scrubbers and separators involved?
No, there are the underground, they're just plastic chambers that hold water, but there is a row of them that we use for water quality, so a section of them will collect all of the silts and sands from, if they use it in the parking area, and all the floatables, bottles and trash and things like that. There is a maintenance schedule and plan for cleaning those things once a year, or depending on how much impact they get from sand and things like that.
And that's true of both structures?
That's correct.
Okay, so when there's a car wash, as there often is in that parking lot, that soapy water will go into this structure and be thus dealt with?
Correct.
Do the roof leaders also go into these structures?
The roof leaders will continue to go where they go now. We are going to collect a couple of the roof leaders, but they're not going to be added to the underground detention, because essentially that's considered clean water.
So the management plan for these structures becomes part of the site plan and is thus enforceable and enforced and policed by the town?
That's correct. Under our MS4 permit, we actually have to keep track of these systems and make sure that these systems are being maintained as they promise the commissions when they're approved. So yeah, this is in our urban areas, therefore we will have to make sure that the management plan is followed too.
How frequently are they monitored? Is the maintenance is required by St. Mary's, I would imagine?
That's correct. So there is, it's really, they say a couple times a year, or when they go and do a visual inspection, if they have a buildup of sediment, then it has to be done.
does the site have a stormwater permit through the state as well?
Not that I'm,
Not to our knowledge.
not to our knowledge, no.
No.
And we don't contribute to state property. There is a historic use of that pipe.
Yeah, I think the state requires a permit for sites that have more than 5 acres of impervious surface.
Of disturbance.
Well, there's a construction stormwater permit, and then there's also a more general permit for sites that have more than 5 acres of impermeable cover.
Well, the general permit is for the construction activities.
Right. There's a construction permit, and then there's also a second permit that would be required.
They may not be required to get
Right.
an industrial discharge permit.
Right.
If they have greater than 5 acres of disturbance, they will have to get a construction permit. Yeah,
Right.
those are the two permits here.
Yeah. But they're not. So if they're not a commercial.
Yeah,
operation, they might
I-
not be required.
You'll have to verify whether you are required.
Yeah, we'll have to verify, but my gut says that we wouldn't meet that criteria, but it's something we can look at.
Do you know how much impervious cover there is? Impervious surface, building and parking lot cover?
Off the top of my
Is that
head.
in your report or no?
No.
No.
Off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think our net, we do have a small net increase, but the current imperviousness is quite high. And I'm not saying that to excuse anything, I'm just saying, stating the obvious that because these parking lots are the playgrounds, or in part, the game fields. So it is high as it is, right? But that's what, this set of pipes is to address that portion of new pavement. This pavement all flows, but because of the way the roof leaders run, we did need to attenuate. But at these points, we are matching existing conditions.
Or less than.
Or less than.
So you said that all the pipes are sized for 100-year storms. So what happens with this extra stuff in the back when it gets to be a 500-year storm? Does it just go over and come down the side, or is it?
Oh, it's going to overflow, it's going to rise up to the catch basins.
Okay.
Be ponded in the parking area.
Okay, that's where we're.
Yeah, it's not going to, I can't say it's not going to overflow the curb, but I mean, there's 6-inch curb.
Right.
So there's storage volume just in the pavement itself.
Yeah, and it would get to the point where it breaks the curb at either end of the retaining wall. If in that scenario, I don't know what storm that would be, but it would be
That would be a major storm.
beyond calculation. In regards to the work at the outlet structure, we've been having conversations internally about the strategy for doing that seasonally. And it seems that, because the goal would be to do it when there isn't water running through the system, so that the offline moment is as big as possible, but we can do it as quickly as possible. So we're targeting the month of August as the moment where groundwater is the lowest, and we could get that sort of changeover as quickly as possible. In a new site or in a different location, you could do some bypassing and rerouting, but that would engage more disturbance. And quite honestly, we're already so close to the property line, we really don't have the latitude for that. So the intent would be to build plunge pool first, so that we've got that as an erosion control measure, first and foremost. Other erosion control measures downstream, and then do the head wall work. And associated with that, we've had conversations about the removal of invasives, which are pretty apparent down there. And I'm going to defer to Martin to explain how we go about doing that, but it would seem to be an appropriate time as well to address those in that same August period. Because we don't want to be down there twice if we can help it, certainly. So Martin, would you like to talk about wetlands?
No,
Unless there's
not
more
at all.
stormwater. What's that?
I really don't.
Not at all?
No.
Just a little?
Yeah, just a little. Sorry, I'd like to make at least one joke per evening. I'm Martin Brogy, I'm a soil scientist with the Soil Science Society of Southern New England. I delineated the wetlands associated with this property and wrote the October 2nd wetland assessment report that hopefully you all have. As talked about here, we've had a lot of interchange and exchanging ideas about the best way to go about implementing this project in terms of stormwater management. And then, according to Michael's, I believe it was an October 12th staff report, there was some concern about invasive species, so we finally looked at that to try and address, how we would manage those during construction. You can see from my wetland report that there's quite a bit of Japanese knotweed down in and around that outlet structure. It's pretty nasty stuff. It's in and around the outlet structure, it's growing up the slope, and it's also, continuing off-site toward the wetland, further to the north. So, as we discussed, there's a relatively high-quality wetland just off-site to the north. Storm drainage comes up out of that DOT pipe with that failed head wall, and goes through a man-made channel that's been excavated. You can see the mounds on either side where it's been excavated and mounded up. And then the knotweed grows on those mounds and in the channel and around the channel. And then it slowly transitions into some nice native vegetation as it begins to level out and get into those nice organic soils associated with the Farmington River floodplain complex down there. There was some wood ducks down there, which typically reflect some pretty high-quality wetlands in the open water area, and it was a pleasure to see those. But in and around that outlet structure, it's really very junky. In terms of delineating the wetland there for soils, Connecticut regulated soils, it's kind of a mixed bag of floodplain soils that were in there. I didn't really encounter any of those organic soils that we find a little bit lower, the Cacti series. It was mostly a floodplain type delineation. And also, that area would I think qualify as an intermittent water course as well. During those wetter times of year, there's some base flow that comes out of the bottom of that nice well-drained soil and enters that man-made swale, and there's a little bit of wetland vegetation in there. So we've got a channel, we've got some power and deposition, we've got some wetland plants growing further down, and we've got some hydrologic exfiltration at the base of that slope. So it qualifies as an intermittent water course as well. So it's not a very high-quality wetland on the site in the area of construction. So I think in one of the photos in that wetland report, you can see how it's really looked like a monoculture of Japanese knotweed there. It grows kind of like Phragmites with rhizomes. The little roots will go across just below the surface. There's probably some in and around behind that head wall. As we excavate around that head wall, we're probably going to be encountering some of those rhizomes. And so there's really a couple of different issues. One is we want to make sure that we don't take any of that stuff off-site. If there's any export of fill material, we won't be taking that knotweed seed stock. A single plant cell of that rhizome can make an entire Japanese knotweed plant and thus a colony somewhere else. So what we plan to do is to sift through that soil and pull out all the rhizomes and root balls that we find in and around the excavation area. And all the knotweed that is growing in the regulated area, we measured it's about 8,000 square feet around the construction zone in the regulated area. We plan to do the sort of the snip and drip technology where we snip all the stems, we drip a little bit of the Roundup into those stems versus spraying. August is the best time actually to hit those plants, so it really is consistent with the construction schedule. And so the remaining plants that are outside the disturbed area, but within the regulated area, we'd be cutting and then dripping a little bit of the glyphosate Roundup into those stems to knock them down. What we do cut, we would put into black 6 mil plastic bags or wrap into a 6 mil plastic sheeting on that hill slope to let it compost and not let it spread. And then we plan to do the cutting of any stems that do pop up in the future, and the dripping, again, in that 8,000 square foot area. And I wrote up a little, just a one-page summary of how we've managed the knotweed in the construction zone that I'd like to pass out to the commission this evening if I may.
Have you had success knocking it back with the?
I have.
How often do you have to hit it with the?
I've done it as little as once a year. I try to use as little as possible, but when you go at the stems, I've actually done it with the leaves and stems on, making a small slit at the very bottom, and then administering it sort of with a syringe, and it worked beautifully. In this case, along a right-of-way driveway, I knocked it back in a year.
And was it gone or just knocked back?
It was gone in the area where I applied it. I mean, there was an off-site area we didn't really get to. So again, I mean, it's sort of a bigger problem. I think Mike reflects that in his report as well, that, you know, shoot, it's off-site. But these are the practices that work best when you prevent the spread. You want to stockpile it anywhere where it's gonna keep growing, or keep it under cover under the black plastic, and then just administer as little of that Roundup as you possibly can, and just really hit those nodules of the rhizomes. The first bullet, it indicates on-site in the project area, but what we really mean is the regulated area.
How do you do the cutting?
With pruners. Yeah, it cuts pretty easily.
Your report has to provide us assurance that the impacts on the regulated area on the property are acceptable. It doesn't really address the larger wetland that's off the property. What can you tell us about impacts there, if any?
Well, again, provided that during construction we maintain our erosion control. That's usually the biggest risk is during construction is a massive erosion incident, which I think by very quickly installing that plunge pool will be mitigated. And certainly it would be a terrible incident if that head wall should fall. And right now there are entrained sediments that run down that channel, you know, leading right up to that into that wetland. The wetland area on site itself consists of a disturbed area full of road sand and overgrown with knotweed. It's the only thing that makes it a regulated area again is that barely meeting that intermittent water course definition and the fact that it's part of a historic floodplain. So the replacement of the head wall, the installation of that plunge pool to capture sediments in the future will actually improve water quality in that wetland in the future downstream.
Are there issues about the sizing of or construction of the plunge pool we should be thinking about?
Well, we're limited by the property boundary. And so we've made that plunge pool as big as we can make it within the confines of the property boundary between the head wall and the property line.
If you were not so constrained, would it be different?
Yeah, we might make a forebay, and then maybe a more elongated type feature. I've done that in the past, like a forebay to capture the initial sediment, and then some additional treatment further downstream from that forebay after the water maybe cascades over a small dam.
Has your client talked to the neighbor about maybe being able to do that?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think we've attempted to expand the project at this point onto
We
adjacent
have not.
properties.
Wouldn't that be a worthwhile thing to do? At least have the conversation?
I kind of feel bad for the church having to replace DOT's head wall as it is.
But if they can do a better job, and a better job for the environment and for the wetland,
Yeah,
by possibly finding an accommodating neighbor who says, sure, go ahead,
yeah,
what's the issue?
yeah. What?
Cost.
Yeah, cost.
Quite honestly, it is.
Well, then you're not going to like my next comment any better. Because it seems to me, you're limiting you're dealing with the invasives to a very small subset of the problem. And again, out of good citizenship, your client might want to talk to the neighbor and see if the neighbor, which is thought to be a like-minded, good quality, eleemosynary institution with the community's interests at heart, might be willing to collaborate in a bigger project to deal with the invasives. Because I think we both know that if you solve the knotweed problem next to a stand of knotweed, it's a rather short-term process. It is not within the regulatory jurisdiction of this body to require anything be done on the neighbor's property. But it sure would be a good thing for the applicant to do by way of good citizenship, to see if that's a possibility.
In my mind, the proposed project as it stood was a significant improvement to existing conditions.
Granted.
But for 3 years, when you knock back the knotweed for 3 years, if it's off, just off across the border, I mean, of the property, it's gonna come back, so.
There's also knotweed outside the regulated area on the property,
On the,
on the school property, sure.
is that going to be addressed?
No.
Could that be addressed while you're doing the other knotweed control?
It's 400 or 500 feet all the way to the edge of the property boundary. It's an enormous undertaking. Once the entire forested area is got some down the property boundary.
What about,
Reason for not doing that.
Well, this whole area is within the regulated area. That is the wooded area.
yeah.
So this is lawn, and then this is Westminster. So I think it would be more accurate to say that we are removing everything that's within, on the property in that corner.
The regulated area.
Yeah, but there's no knotweed up here in the lawn.
No.
That's right.
Right, I see. Right.
Where's the other knotweed on the?
Well, driving by tonight, I wanted to make sure I wasn't over-committing, to this letter in terms of the level of effort there. I thought it was a very good fit. But as I'm driving down the road, I could see it, in here.
A lot of it?
I couldn't really tell, but I saw the flowers. It's, it's time of year where those white flowers are popping out, so I saw some in here. And as I walked up in here, I saw some on the slope, there's bittersweet in there. There's grapevine that acts like an invasive. There's barberry in there. I actually am implementing a wildlife habitat enhancement grant on my own 55 acres in Wyndham. And it's a $35,000 grant from USDA that I'm implementing over a period of 5 years, and it's been an enormous effort. So to try and eradicate all the invasive species, on the property is a...
It might be a long-term project, but I'm just trying to figure out the great that, that part will be eradicated, but it'll just blow in from somewhere else, and so what's the, unless you get it on the other areas.
It can also come in through the storm drain. That's probably how it came there. And it will continue, even if we clean up that entire area. There's going to be seeds coming in through the storm drain from Hot Meadow as well.
Not as much up the northern. I don't remember where it'd be coming in from the northern side, from the Hot Meadow exactly.
Yeah, I just mean entrained in stormwater sediments off of.
I'm trying to figure where it would come from there, because I haven't really seen it up in that section.
Yeah, I don't really know. The thing to keep in mind too is, the Japanese knotweed doesn't like to get its feet wet, and we transition very nicely into some very nice native vegetation as the more higher quality wetland to the north, begins to take place and you reach those organic soils, and knotweed's not really in there. It's really more of an upland invasive plant. It just happens to be in this disturbed, sandy area. So it's not really a wetland quality issue, it's more like an upland bordering vegetation issue.
It's more of a problem that whole area is starting to be taken over by Japanese knotweed.
Yeah.
No one wants to deal with it. And if we don't deal with it on our own properties, then just give it up to Japanese knotweed.
I hate to stop myself. It's an expensive undertaking and a very long-term issue.
So just to be clear, where exactly is the area that you're planning to cut and,
The regulated area,
which is the dark green
basically
there?
right here, but it's about 8,000 square
Yeah,
feet.
this dark green.
Out to the corner of the parking lot there?
This is grass, yeah, this is
To the
grass.
corner of the parking lot
Well,
there?
this is lawn.
Yes, there's not
It's
any in
maintained.
there.
There's a fence line here, so it's a pretty crisp delineation between the slope and the lawn. So there won't be any to remove up here. So it's really below that fence line.
Right, but so then it won't, you're not gonna go farther east of that, where that fence crosses the upland review area?
This is north, this is...
Sorry, to the
South.
south.
No.
Well, there isn't any knotweed up here.
No, but you're saying along the back of the parking lot,
Well,
there's more.
that's not our present proposal, no.
But, okay.
That's all I can tell you, is that it's not presently in the proposal.
Mike had mentioned sort of the off-site issue in your report, as well as the sort of the jurisdiction in the regulated area.
And Don also repeated it. The only question I had is exactly what Jim's saying, because along the eastern frontage on Iron Horse Boulevard, you will be building that retaining wall. Will you be accessing everything from the Hot Meadow side of the property?
Boy.
I mean, because if you're going in there and disturbing the area when you build that retaining wall, I mean, it will be disturbing the earth and therefore regrading, restabilizing the area, moving. There's potential that area could be disturbed, stabilized.
And we haven't had those conversations, so I don't know. I'm not sure that working off of the right-of-way is a workable or acceptable solution, but so I hadn't really anticipated that.
Just suggesting that, because that would also kind of, some of the concerns mentioned by the commission would be addressed. I do say this in a construction manner, the fact that they're going to go in there, they're building, how tall is the wall at the highest point? Is it
6.5 feet or so at the highest.
So it's a tall wall going in, so there will have to be some clearing along the toe of the wall in order to do, there's a footing with this wall, correct? So you'd
We're
over
talking about a
excavate.
masonry unit wall, so the footing is relatively shallow, but it's several units deep, and then it builds up. So it's a little more like trenching than excavating a deep footing. But there would be certainly some disturbance.
Some incidental
required.
disturbance
Yeah.
to the east of that wall, so there will be,
Yeah, it's almost a situation where it could be done from the top down, just because it is not so deep at the base. And I'm just not sure what the latitude for letting us do that would be, because we haven't had that conversation in terms of use of the right-of-way for access.
What's the advantage of that, Michael? Where are you going with that?
where my comment was going, since you said you observed native, invasive species in the area, and really the management plan was focused for invasive species down near the outlet. If you had incidental disturbance over there, they're going to have to, one, there'll be exposed earth over there, they'll have to seed and stabilize it, so whatever invasive stand is there would be eradicated by the construction activities. Which a contractor may want to come from Iron Horse Boulevard building that wall. So the reality is that that area could be disturbed, stabilized, and may not need a specific management plan per se like the other areas if
Well, if
they're
there's-
moving dirt.
Japanese knotweed in the.
If they're moving dirt, that's not
Yeah.
the only, obviously.
And forgive me, the dark green to the east, is that the upland review area as well?
No, the upland review area ends here.
That's lined there, okay, thank you.
Oh.
All right, outside our jurisdiction.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to give the commission a kind of assurance that there's other activities that could occur that may
Yep.
manage that area in another
You
fashion.
want Japanese rhizomes, Japanese knotweed rhizomes in the wall or around the.
No.
Yeah, probably not.
might want to address them anyway. Yeah.
In the same way we're doing.
So part of that wall is in the upland review area, the corner of it.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Staff is satisfied with the plunge pool as it is now designed?
It's designed to, Henry, can you go over that again? You're designing your stormwater design for the 100-year storm event, correct?
Well, the plunge pool is an exception to that.
You assume flows that were coming out of that, because obviously it's a large area that contributes.
We've simply made it as large as we could within the area that we have.
Okay. Based on the sizing of that plunge pool, what are you anticipating?
I don't have an answer to that. I'm pretty sure we don't have an answer.
What size
We-
riprap is it
It's
proposed?
modified riprap, so 6-inch to 10-inch.
Because the concern staff would have is that the sizing, both the stone and the actual construction itself, is the appropriate size stone. If this thing's undersized, basically with all the water that would be coming through this pipe, it'll just blow out that plunge pool. If it is sized properly, it could function, and forgive me, I'm not a PE, but as almost a level spreader, correct?
Correct.
So.
The
Go
idea
ahead.
behind the plunge pool is just to dissipate some of that energy when it goes down into that plunge pool. It is a couple feet deep with larger 6 to 10-inch stone, sharp edge stone, so it's going to dissipate some of that energy when it goes through there.
So your sizing, you went on a larger size with a conservative number in mind. Is that what you're trying to explain to us?
Generally, yes.
And staff is comfortable with that, saying that if it's sized as a conservative, and that's pretty much the smallest that they can build this thing in order to accommodate the discharge that comes out of this pipe. And a lot of it, like I said, is going off assumptions about how large of a drainage area is contributing to this. Because it's a state right-of-way, along with other right-of-way, other public roads that connect.
Seminary Road Hill just runs straight into that drain. That carries a lot of water. Is there an alternative to a plunge pool?
I think the plunge pool is probably the best energy dissipator. I mean, we could look at, I was thinking maybe some concrete with, we've done in the past a concrete spillway that has some stones kind of built into it so they don't really move. But the sizing of the riprap and the excavation is going to, I think, probably the best way to dissipate that energy coming through that pipe.
I think it's important to realize that as it stands now with no protection, that there's no erosion going on in that channel. There's just sedimentation. The channel's stable with the existing flows. It has been for quite some time.
Could a concrete flare-in work at this? But you still need some kind of energy
Yes,
dissipator,
exactly
correct?
right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And
So-
the reason why they put the head walls there to hold back the bank, but also they were limited by the area they had to do the work.
So this is really the only engineered solution you have, it seems like, judging by how much energy is coming out of that pipe.
Correct. I mean, yes.
I think Martin's statement says a lot, though, about what you might expect. If the sediment resists channeling, then certainly the riprap should as well.
It will be stable.
How deep is the plunge pool?
It is a couple feet deep.
It was 2 feet?
2 feet.
Yeah, 15 by 18 by 2.
That's below the existing grade, 2 feet, so there'll be
Correct.
that much sediment that'll need to be removed to construct the.
Correct, right.
15 by 18 is a pretty good size. It's a pretty good size.
The is it possible that soil will be saturated when you do the construction work?
We're close to the water table there. In August, less likely. I mean, when I was out there earlier in the season, there was standing water in the bottom of the channel.
Mhm.
Certainly close to groundwater. So we'd over excavate, I mean, the bottom of the plunge pool is 2 feet. Probably over excavate a couple of feet, you might be a little bit into some wet soil there, some wet sand.
Would you still be able to place the riprap?
Oh, sure.
And construct
Yeah, maybe put down some
underwater?
fabric and, yeah.
Would you need to de-water the hole to do that?
That's what we do with wet
No, just
excavation,
line-
is put
line
stone
it
in, actually,
excavation.
you know, you can't really put soil into a wet hole, but you can put stone into a wet hole, and it's fine. It's like bridging an excavation with stone, so it works.
And then, do you have a plan for managing the sediment that you pull out, the soil that you pull out?
As far as off-site disposal goes, or relocation,
Yeah.
one to remove the rhizomes, certainly, and all, any bits of the Japanese bamboo.
Mhm.
I don't know where there's a spoils, but the contractor will probably take it back to their yard, pick up the work they do, yeah.
We can designate it to leave site, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Are you planning to de-water it on site?
Oh,
Or so
no,
if it
I
comes
would-
out and it's saturated and it's a soupy mess.
Yeah, but I would think
How are you gonna handle it?
we would want to go straight into boxes in a vehicle, I would think. We could pile it, let it run off. What would the preference be? I don't have an answer for that. Is there a good or bad decision there to be made? I don't know. I'm not the expert at that, so I shouldn't have.
I'm not allowed to have, soupy stuff in a truck going down the road, I mean, that's.
Okay, well, in that case,
Yeah,
they would have to,
de-water
right,
it.
pile and de-water,
Yeah.
and then pick it up a second time.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much water would be in there, or how deep it is. But it's very dry now.
Yeah.
Everything is.
Yeah, yeah. And so now it's, we're looking at August, and it'll be similar.
Okay. In the plan, I know it's thinking out pretty far here, and we don't even know if it will be saturated, but that, the plan for handling that will be,
Yeah, we'd be happy to make that.
will be discussed with town staff.
We're happy to make that a condition if it's not already addressed by a DOT requirement in terms of transit.
Huh?
If it is, then it would already.
We'd also say any dewatering would follow the guidelines in the manual, the stormwater manual, so I want to see fabric put down, hay bales around, stone at the of overflow corner. The specs are right in the manual. That way at least there's some containment too.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. You want to make a mess of it, or you don't want it running beyond the riprap, be able to control the water.
That's not a large amount. It's not a large amount of material, so.
15 by 18 by 2.
I think we have 270 yards
Total.
of the excavation, so
Doing the head
some of that will be wet or water.
Right.
About 15
Wait, is that,
cubic
no, I'm
yards.
sorry, that's not 270 yards. That's
No.
cubic feet,
Where's-
right? 10 yards. I'm sorry. I
It
apologize.
looks like that riprap basin will generate about 15 cubic yards of excavation spoils.
Mhm.
It's manageable.
Yeah.
So it's one truckload of material
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a triaxle.
Yeah.
On the knotweed, you mentioned using Roundup. I don't want to exceed my expertise here, but am I wrong that Roundup is the formulation of glyphosate that is not suited to wetlands, and something like Rodeo or another formula is more suited to wetland use?
It's been my experience and understanding that the Roundup breaks down very, very quickly in the environment.
I think the question is there are various products that contain glyphosate.
This is a glyphosate project,
And,
for
but
sure.
but some are more suited to particular applications than others. And my impression, as I say, only my layman's impression, is that Roundup is not generally thought of as suitable for wetlands, but the rodeo or some other glyphosate compound is the one that's preferred.
I don't think we're going to be using the Roundup actually in the wetlands.
Close enough.
Right, it's a hill
Near
slope.
the intermittent, well, it's also near the,
Yeah, we'd be excavating that out. We'll be snipping the bamboo in the wetland, and then excavating out that soil and going through it and picking out the rhizomes and the root ball. We wouldn't actually be applying it in the wetland. Mostly be applying it on the slope.
that intermittent stream, the plunge pool area where you have the rhizomes. Yeah, that's also my impression.
You might look into that.
Yeah, that's a good point. We can make that condition.
Are there any other questions from the commissioners? I would entertain a motion.
Sure. I will make a motion that we find that this is a regulated activity because the proposed construction is in a wetland and in the upland review area.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'll make a motion that we find that this is not a significant impact activity because the nature of the erosion and sediment controls that are part of the plan appear to be appropriate for the proposed construction, and that the purpose of the work in the wetlands is to improve the erosion and sediment control features that are already there, and thus will have a net positive impact on the wetland.
Second.
All in favor?
And I'll make a motion that we approve the application subject to the special conditions and standard conditions in the staff report. And I don't think we had any other conditions that we wanted to add, did we?
Well, not a condition, but we might just drop a footnote as we're doing this, that the applicant's going to verify that there is no further state permit required. And I think we should also say, although not as a condition as such to the permit, that we would regard it as a better outcome if the applicant were able to reach an accommodation with its neighbor, both to have a preferable design to the plunge pool and to undertake a more widespread invasives project.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. On to new business, receipt of new applications.
You have no applications for next.
All right, the next item, General Commission business, approval of minutes for October 3rd, 2017. Does anyone have any changes, additions, anything? All right, those minutes will be filed. And now we get to the forest management discussion. And we have a guest tonight, Eric Hammerling. And welcome, Eric.
Good evening. Very glad to be here. What a pleasure it is to be back in Simsbury. My name's Eric Hammerling. I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association, formerly Executive Director of the Farmington River Watershed Association. And although my headquarters is down in Middlefield, CFPA was established originally in Simsbury in 1895, the Weetog section of town. So, been here for a long time. I wanted to talk about a few things, but first of all, really just to acknowledge Simsbury's incredible forestry history and why, even though this is a local matter and as a statewide organization, we typically don't get involved in local matters. We do get involved in those that could have broader applications. And I think this is an important thing for the town to consider. Because of your history, Gifford Pinchot, as I drove over from West Hartford this evening, the one thing lit along 185 is is your Pinchot sycamore tree. When I look at the town seal, it's made of wood. It's ringed with leaves. The largest element on it is a tree. It even says on there, and I never noticed this before, it says, "Value me as you please," as that motto, and I think that's a bit of what we're going to talk about tonight, I hope. But before talking about the proposal, let me just mention a few caveats right up front. I am not a Connecticut certified forester, but as some of you know, I've worked for many years on forest policy issues. Was chair of the state's Vegetation Management Task Force, which developed recommendations for the state after Tropical Storm Irene and the October nor'easter 5 years ago. I did study silviculture and forest management, in graduate school, though, that was not the primary focus of my graduate studies. I would say that on forestry issues, I'm probably amongst the most well-informed people around. So as I would argue, this is as much a policy issue as it is a forestry issue. I hope this will be compelling for you. I also have to acknowledge I'm not an expert on the forest characteristics of Belden Forest or Ethel Walker Woods. So I'm not making specific recommendations for what management prescriptions you might employ there. But again, the reason that I am here is that I think it makes a lot of sense to consider managing certain areas of forest in Simsbury as either old growth or wildlands, depending on how you want to frame that. I mention wildlands because, as you may be well aware, there's a New England-wide effort to conserve forest land called the Wildlands and Woodlands Vision. That vision, based on research from the Harvard Forest in Massachusetts, plans on keeping forest as forest in New England by protecting 90% of our forests as actively managed woodlands and 10% as more passively managed wildlands. So that you know what I'm talking about when I mention wildlands, there is a definition of that. So let me just quickly read that for you. Wildlands are protected forest areas identified based on local considerations with very little human management and no development. Ultimately, the degree of human use and activity in these areas will depend on the type of forest, its sensitivity to disturbance, and the needs and interests of the people who establish the reserve. Wildlands and Woodlands envisions wildlands as primarily free from human disturbance, where nature can take its course. Values to conserving larger undisturbed natural areas include increased regional resilience to climate change, invasive species, and other threats, provision of rare habitats for plants and animals, opportunities for the majestic old-growth forest so underrepresented in eastern forests, safeguarded lands with natural, cultural, and spiritual significance, opportunities for backcountry recreation and quiet wilderness contemplation, high-quality watershed protection and carbon storage, and unique scientific reference points for improving management practices elsewhere. In my letter that was submitted to the Commission, I was trying to make the point, and I'm not sure how effectively I made it, and I'm, of course, open up to any questions you may have after my brief statement here. I was trying to make the point that old growth is a management choice. And there are varieties of management that could lead to an old-growth reserve. I brought a copy of a pamphlet that was actually put together by UMass Extension a few years ago called Restoring Old Growth Characteristics. In that pamphlet, there is a range of options from actually active management to achieve old growth to passive management to achieve old growth. And I'm not trying to suggest there's only one way to get to that end goal. That's a decision for the town to make. But when I think about the history of Simsbury in forestry, when I think about Simsbury as a leading town in conservation circles for many, many years, as a town where I know if you took this on, you would do a great job of it, and it could be a model for other towns to learn from, I would really encourage you to think about having pieces of forest land in town forest be protected and managed as areas that will become old growth. So I'll leave this with you. I don't know, Michael?
Can make some copies. I'll make copies for the commission.
With that, I didn't have more of a prepared statement, just happy to respond to any questions, and I know there are probably others who might want to speak.
Yeah, just, I know what we're hoping to do is have a discussion tonight about forest management in general. Charlie had done a very good job of sending out some comments, sort of reiterating what we were doing in our last meetings. I thought I added to them. I thought I had forwarded them to everyone. Somehow it got gobbled up in the internet.
Oh, no.
So I apologize to the commission for that. I remember hitting send. I don't know what happened after that. So we're looking for input from the public to see where we're going. We do have the issue that we have at least 4 parcels that have management plans. We're trying to see whether we should approve them, what we should do. But before we do that, we want to inform ourselves as to this, what we have and what we should do with them. None of us are foresters either. So we're trying to get, I know there's interest on the public's part as to what we should do with them. We're trying to look at that and whether we should act on a piecemeal basis to identify, do these plans, or whether we should look at a more regional plan for forest management. One of the things we brought up at the last meeting was we don't necessarily know what our neighbors to the town properties are doing. And until we know what they're doing, it's really hard to inform ourselves as to what we should do on our property. Because our properties are not in isolation from those other properties. And that's probably, and I know, that's the big issue. And what's the best way of getting these property owners together to discuss this? Is it easy to get property owners to tell you what they're planning on doing with them?
I think you know the answer to that.
No, it's not. But what's your experience in doing that?
Well, I mean, if you're going through a visioning process for, the first critical question of developing a forest management plan, and that's determining what's your objective for that piece of property. If you're doing it in a really thoughtful way, you would be reaching out to your neighbors and saying, here's what we're thinking about doing. If we're going to be ultimately successful, it's going to take all of us being a part of this, and asking them very directly to participate in the process. If they don't, and you can't force them to, you have to make your best decision based on what you would like to manage for. One thing that has been brought to my attention before with regard to Simsbury is that there are several forest management plans that are in process. We're at CFPA big supporters of good forest management plans, but where a lot of communities fall down, I've seen, is to not have a great process before getting to the forest management plan of determining what are those end goals that you would like to see. I honestly don't know enough about the process you went through here.
We don't really have a process. I think, we have management plans, but we don't have a process to how to, we had the process to get the management plans, but we didn't have a process to what the desired outcome was.
Yeah, and one thing that some towns will have is a forest advisory committee sometimes as a subcommittee of the Conservation Commission or as its own standalone body with, people who have some, combination of interest and knowledge on forestry issues to help advise what might be the goals that come out that are incorporated into the forest management plans. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to come up with one way that you want to manage all of your forests. There are so many differences between various sites, and it's okay to have lots of different objectives in different areas. That's why we suggest that, as you're thinking about all the different options for management, I would hope one of the tools you would think about is an old growth option, amongst, all the town forests.
Now, I understand that the Department of Natural Resources, old growth is 120 years. Is that, it's not like it turns suddenly old
Yeah.
growth at 120. It's a process to get to that.
Right. Yeah, and the pamphlet, actually, they classify old growth as closer to 200 years, but
And it depends on the forest.
Exactly. It depends on the composition of the forest. It depends on, what type of management you want to employ. If you do some active management towards an old growth end, you can jumpstart a few things, but you also, it is a less natural way to get there. So it's kind of, it's your decision on how
Are there
to
any
do that.
good resources that we could look at to see, the active management versus the very passive management, like nature takes course with maybe invasive plant removal and things like that, sort of a minimal approach.
Yeah.
Are there good resources that you could direct us to?
Yeah, and I apologize, I keep coming back to this pamphlet. I was looking around for something that was both, pretty straightforward and simple to understand, but also had some, had some depth to it. And I think this is actually quite good. It really shows as you go through, if you look at maybe page 8 and 9, if you're looking at options for, active management to get old growth structural characteristics, there's a number of things that are proposed here. On page 11, there are a number of different practices that kind of, again, goose things towards old growth status. But that's only if the decision is that you want to more actively manage. They also have information in here about passive management towards the same end.
Have you had any experience with active management where you end up with more invasives? That's always a concern that, by making any clearing, you're making enough.
Yep.
Now, you're responsible for it because you did it rather than the wind blowing down something.
Right.
You might get them either way. But have you had with the issue of invasives moving in?
Yeah, what we have typically done when we're doing, some harvest work on one of the properties that we own or manage, or working with other foresters who do it elsewhere, they will typically come in before a harvest and do invasive treatments, and after harvest do invasive treatments. So
Does that go on?
it could go on for years. And certainly that's one of the things, I also wanted to be very clear on when I'm talking about old growth, preserves, reserves, wildlands, however you'd like to term them, that doesn't mean that you don't address things like invasives. It doesn't mean that you don't do anything in those areas if it's necessary to. And that's why if you go down the road of having something like an easement in that area to make very specific what practices are restricted and what are allowed, you want to make sure to leave enough flexibility that as time goes on, and if a new thing arises, you'll be able to respond and address that. But I do think, just thinking policy-wise, and thinking even wearing a, a marketing or a tourism hat, think about Simsbury being that place where people could come visit to see a place that is, it's not yet old growth. It's not true old growth because that's mostly gone in Connecticut, but here's a town with the foresight to say, we're going to manage this area so that, several generations down the road, people will thank us because we had the foresight to think ahead. And I would love to see Simsbury be a leader in that.
Are there other towns in Connecticut that are doing this?
No, this would be the first, if talking specifically about being a part of the old growth forest network, no other town in Connecticut has yet done that. I think others might have the statistics on who has done it elsewhere, but no one in Connecticut.
Is this something that Connecticut Forests and Parks is interested? I mean, I think you just said that, but.
Yeah, well, I'm interested in, seeing it done right, and interested in seeing a town like Simsbury that I know would do it right, be a leader. But I don't know if is it okay for others to
Yes.
contribute to the discussion?
This is a workshop, so we're looking for input from you and also questions from the commission.
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
We have debated quite a bit between more passive management strategies and much more active management strategies towards old growth, developing old growth characteristics in the forest. But one of the challenges that I've had, one of the things that I've struggled with is there seem to be a lot of recommendations on both sides and not a lot of hard empirical data to support one side or the other. And I know part of the problem, right, is that these, forest growth takes, decades, hundreds of years, right? And so it just may not be available. But how much, empirical data really is there to support one management strategy versus another?
Well, the Harvard Forest has at least 60 years of data of various types of management prescriptions that they've used over time, and that's where, that's one of the reasons why they say wildlands is one of those options that they would really recommend being a part of the mix, because they've seen real differences between something forest managed as wildland versus more actively managed in a number of different ways. So there is some data like that, but it is very hard to have a deep pool of knowledge on that. Then again, there probably are additional things that I'm just not aware of that are out there that I'd be happy to, help with some of the research on that if that's a direction you want it to go.
Because it is such a long time frame for the trees, do you see, I mean, these plans, I would imagine, would take, we have time to take our time to do these plans. There's nothing's going to happen next year or the year after. I mean, trees work on a different time frame. I know with Harvard, a lot of their trees blew down in the 1938 storm, so they started.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, and 100 and 200 years ago, there weren't really that many forests in Connecticut because it was all agricultural.
Mhm.
So this is.
Well, the longest journey starts with one step, right? And certainly, I think what Harvard did was they said at some point in time, okay, we're going to give it a try. And I hope, that as you think about various options, that's one of the things that you keep in mind is just, hey, what's the harm of giving it a try? And I do think that there is great potential for this to be something really cool for, think about some of the research that could be done there. Think about, the schools that could start, having that kind of experience and exposure. It's a different feel recreationally to be in an older forest. And so I think it's something to really consider.
Eric, we're in an awkward position because a number of citizens are really asserting that we should let Mother Nature handle this altogether. They reject the notion that you can manage for old growth characteristics. And really would like to just let the forest be. I keep looking at your letter where you say at the same time you should ensure that you can actively manage the property for native plant and animal species, to remediate this and that. So we're not talking about the same concept uniformly here. I take it there are none of CFPA's own lands that are left to Mother Nature herself.
All of the properties that we own or even hold easements on are more actively managed.
And would you consider giving an easement to a third party to police what you do with the land in the future?
We might. We typically play that role with others. We are the third party in many other situations. Yeah, we would consider that. I think, having been a part of the negotiation and writing up of many easements, there is always a way to, accomplish multiple goals and write it as narrowly or loosely as you need to make sure, but it takes time. It takes time. But I think it's worthwhile thinking through. And I think when, and I don't want to speak for anyone else who may, approach this differently, but I think there are certain things like you were talking about invasives earlier. You can hope that they will go away. They really rarely do. And if that's something that you want to be a part of, the reserve is, it's not only older trees, but it's also more native species. That's something that I would suggest should be managed.
One of the things that strikes me, the management of invasive species on the town land that we do have, the forested land, and you probably run into this problem too. While we manage that land, people are busily planting all of those plants on their own property. I know our plan of conservation and development is trying to encourage people not to do that. There's really not much. I mean, we need a big educational push. Is this something that the Connecticut Forests and Parks is looking at? Because it is a colossal waste of energy to remove these things while they are not managed on other people's land.
Right. Well,
and it's a tricky thing. How do you tell people?
Yeah.
This is not a good plan.
Well, sometimes for us certainly, and I'd imagine the town is the same, is it's a matter of where you want to put your resources. The most efficient way to use your resources is to protect areas that are not already overridden with invasives. And if there are those places, and if those happen to be places that you're thinking about as potential old growth forest reserves, that's the ideal.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that in the ideal world, does Connecticut Parks and Forest ever consider doing an educational type thing where they are reaching out to the homeowners, the landowners, because that's a huge amount of land that's being managed. We can only manage the little parts that we've got, but it's really hard to do it without the cooperation of the. I just think this is an opportunity for, if we could all get on board, do an educational push. There are many voices saying the same thing. Don't plant these plants.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the way that ultimately we'll have more success with invasives.
Is there any land that the Connecticut Forests and Parks would consider using well, I find management is a term that we use, but we don't really define, exactly what is meant by management, but more passive management. Are there any lands that Connecticut Forests and Parks is managing in a more passive way? or are they considering doing it on some of theirs towards this old growth idea?
Yeah, well,
Seeing what Mother Nature
There's
does
a-
with invasive plant
right,
removal.
so there's a pretty big diversity between the various properties that we hold or hold easements on, but one of the properties that we hold an easement on, right behind our headquarters in Middlefield, it's 280 acres, and basically the only forestry management that's been done there is there's been some removal of invasives, and there are some trails there.
Yeah.
That's essentially all we've done there. The reasons are, the soils are not appropriate for doing, harvest work in some areas. It's very close to neighborhoods and other areas that we feel that would not be a good thing to do. So, and I know you face all the same issues. So, there are places where, like that not much active management is happening. There are others where, and when I say active management, we're not actively managing for money. We're actively managing for the health of the forest and the type of forest we would like to see there. So, for example, it might be removing trees in some area to restore pitch pine. The only way to do that is to open up an area, do a prescribed burn. There are a lot of things involved with that. You can't just expect it's going to come back on its own, because it hasn't. So yeah, we both actively and relatively passively manage properties.
Depending on the site and characteristics of the forest.
So I've got a couple tactical questions.
Sure.
You actually said that it would be interesting if we could talk to our various neighbors on how they're using the land. But if we were to decide that something like we're really interested in going after old growth forest, and we've made a discussion about how much management should be in there, does it really matter what they're saying? I mean, if we're going to be the lead, if we're going to try to set up a policy and be a leader, I mean, it'd be nice to talk to them. But if they aren't talking to us, would that hold us up for any reason? Would that change any of our decisions?
I would hope not. I would
Okay.
hope you would forge ahead.
Okay, second item is, you talked at the very beginning about a ratio of like 9% active managed to 10% wildlands. And I was just wondering where that relative ratio came from.
That's right from the Wildlands and Woodlands New England-wide report. Now, keeping in mind, it's New England-wide, so there are areas that would probably be more than 10% and areas that would probably be more than 90%, from various state to state, but that's their overall ratio.
So that's the current ratio right now, but there's nothing claiming that, for some reason, if we came up with something that was half and half, that wouldn't be an issue.
Right, no, that's purely your decision, yeah.
Do you have any? Do you adapt any of your forest management strategies around specific wildlife that live in those forests?
Yeah, we participated in the Forest for the Birds program with Audubon, Connecticut, and in a couple areas have done some specific management for various forest nesting birds. So yeah, primarily for birds.
What do you do about deer?
Well, and this is, we have hunting on, several of the properties that we own. It's been that way since they were gifted to the organization. It was hunted before, it's still hunted. But that doesn't mean we don't still have deer problems. And the reason for the hunting in most of the areas is just seeing that oak regeneration was not happening because of having too many deer on the land.
If you could just take a step back and talk a little bit about how did you do your active management for the birds? Like what was involved when you actually said, okay, we're going to actively manage for the birds?
Yeah, well, first, Audubon, Connecticut did the surveys and they, I don't know if Simsbury has worked with the Forest for the Birds program, but
Figures have.
okay, the Riegers have, good. So, and I would expect that. They first do a survey of the property and say, here are the types of birds that you have, and if you manage the land in some additional ways, here are the additional birds that you would have.
Okay.
So, they laid out, a number of different things in terms of habitat requirements, and then, at least one harvest was done in an area specifically to improve habitat for one species.
So actually, based on that recommendations, you went in, harvested some specific trees, and how did that harvesting help the birds?
In this instance, it was, to open up an area, they needed to have, a more open area
But
for
more open
nesting.
area. Okay.
And that gets to, I think that gets to the question you had, it might not be an issue for old growth, but if other people are logging their property, opening it up, then it becomes a question how much of our land has to be opened up. That's where I think figuring out what other people are doing in their property, what birds would be benefiting from the openings in those properties, so how much of our land needs to be opened up. That's why I was thinking a regional approach.
Yeah, well,
would be
if
important.
one of your goals is wildlife habitat, that makes sense to think about the connections, but there are a lot of other goals that don't necessarily have to be dependent on what other
No.
people are doing, but I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, no, I was gonna say, without doubt, a regional approach is great. But where I was getting at was it a requirement if we were, in order to come up with a plan or start to think about how we're gonna execute it, if you can't get regional cooperation, can we still move forward if we've come up with some well thought out plans ourselves? And what I've heard is if we've thought about it, we can still push forward without losing much. We should try to do it, but we don't want to be held up for 10 years trying to get other people to get organized.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, be the leader again.
Right.
Don't wait until everyone
Right.
is on the same page
No.
before you do anything.
But I would think that our plan would benefit from being informed by,
Yep.
as much as we can,
Yes.
by
Yep.
what everyone else is doing.
Yep,
I mean,
totally agree.
if we're next to a state forest, and there's a plan, there's a long-term plan to manage certain parts of that,
Mm-hmm.
then that would inform how we deal with.
Yeah, and I would hope, likewise, knowing that you're planning to manage in a certain way allows them to improve and change their forest management plan for the future once, your management regime is underway.
Yes,
I didn't come
Thank you,
prepared
Eric.
to, let's say, speak in an organized way, but I would like to touch on some of the things that Eric has shared with us and some of the things that we've been talking about here together. First of all, when we talk about our neighbors, let me backtrack. Let me say one other point before that. All the information that we have been using to date has been, let's say, past practice information. In all my reading that I've been doing and all my talking with people, as I'm trying to inform myself, it was said by several sources, written and spoken, that we have all been operating on information, empirical information, as you use the word. I don't go for empirical information. I expect people like our colleague here to do it in a way and then explain it to me, because I can't go there. However, when you have information that is, as I was told, up until 2014, we had been operating on information that was 40 years old, that we had not had the opportunity, and there had not been natural scientists who were really actively entering into that area of research to, let's say, find new information and to share it with all of us so that we could be informed and know what we're doing if we are responsible for such large tracts of land. So, when you say that some of us in the community are not as interested in in following that past practice. We're interested in trying to gather as much as we can in the new information that is there. It may not be 40 years old, but it's there. And it is giving us something else to think about. And I was thinking about what Eric said about here we might, in this particular time, have the opportunity, if we have been approached and if we can, let's say, identify, no easements, no nothing, just identify pieces of what we have to think about. We're not saying everything, we're saying pieces, whether it be a pocket or be a pocket forest that has no other neighbors around Simsbury, being Belden. It, like Eric says, it gives an opportunity to say maybe we need someplace locally within the region to offer to science to study and to get to know more about what it means. Belden is probably our closest thing to an old growth, but we might have pockets in other forests as well. And the intent is for finding a way to identify what we have. This is one way to do it. Now, I'm looking at my notes here. See, Eric talked about how you look at forests. The primary concern is safety and health. Safety because, I think in my time here, these lands have been paid for by the taxpayer, by other groups that have helped us pay for it. Now they want access. Now you want that access to be minimal, but appropriate. You want that access to be safe. So I can understand active management there because of those two issues. Now the word management seems to be bothering a lot of us. And I think we are in that timing where we're going from old information to newer information. Management can mean that we don't do anything to this piece, or we have to do something. It's an ongoing thing. It's not you decide today that this is what we're going to do forever for this piece, this piece, this piece. It's an ongoing effort. So management for us is a problematic word, and I think we need to be open-minded to say, how are we using it? And we're going to have to correct ourselves each time we use the word. We're going to have to say, I'm talking about this kind of way of thinking about
I
it.
agree, but the terminology is.
I'm sorry?
The terminology is really holding us
It's
up.
problematic right now for us, okay? Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention from management also means that you have to really know the history of your parcels, the ecological history of it. You have to also know the history of what's happened to it since man has taken hold and what has man done to it. It's a big issue, but I think what's before us today is an opportunity that is unique. And I'm looking for really considering the idea of joining the network, because it just provides another opportunity for that study that is in play. And as Eric said, we've been forerunners before. Let's, this is another way to say, let's think about this in this way.
Which gets us to the Old Forest Network. Last time we had a meeting, we had a lot of questions about the Old Forest Network.
I had a lot of questions about what?
About the Old Forest Network. We just didn't know enough.
Correct.
Susan, you submitted something to to us tonight. Would you like to speak to that?
Sure, yes, thank you. So my name is Susan Casino, 41 Madison Lane. I'm a resident of Simsbury. I'm here tonight on behalf, actually, of the Old Growth Forest Network. I'm actually the Old Growth Forest coordinator for Hartford County. It's a position that I applied for and was appointed to about 6 or 8 months ago. My PhD is in biology. I run a biomedical research lab, and my focus is neuroscience, and my research is focused on brain health, which is one of the reasons why I'm interested in the forests. So I'd like to kind of go over a couple of things and sort of simplify what we're talking about here in terms of the designation in the old growth forest network. And I'll also add that I'm also the spokesperson overall for Keep the Woods, which is a group that started in 2005 related to the preservation of the Ethel Walker Woods, which involved 5 separate votes over 7 years, grants, thousands of donations, etc. So that group involves a lot of people and a lot of time and a lot of expertise, knowing a lot about that property, and I've gotten very interested in these issues based on that effort. And unfortunately, I was unable to come to the last meeting. I know you had some questions. Maybe Eric has addressed some of them, but I wanted to address any others tonight. And the main take-home message is that your commission is being asked to give a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen to have them then have the forest considered for incorporation into the network. There's no legal implications, there's no legal teeth to the designation, it's more of a statement of community support. What Eric was talking about related to an easement would be a possible future step that isn't even for consideration right now because the forests haven't even been accepted into the network. So you would say to the Board of Selectmen, yes, we agree to allow this consideration to go forward. The Board of Selectmen would say yes, and then they would decide if the forest could be included into the network, and then they could be designated. And as Eric also said, these would be the first forests in Simsbury, which is another reason why I applied for this position. I don't need another job. I have several community efforts I'm in. I have kids. I have a real job. But when I went onto the Old Growth Forest Network, I saw that there were none designated in Connecticut. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing opportunity. Simsbury would be the perfect town to designate a forest. And the 2 forests that I think would be perfect for this would be Belden, which is already quite old. It's in the middle of town. It's very accessible in terms of its location and has a lot of qualities I could talk a little bit more about. The Ethel Walker Woods has really been a community effort, and in terms of neighboring properties, we know that they're all being managed. So I did reach out to the neighboring properties. The state is about to log Misako Forest, which is in between Ethel Walker and Onion Mountain. Tell Meadow Farm owns property near there. That's managed. The whole pasture is already managed. There's also Young Forest near Ethel Walker, and there's a Wegner Meadow within the Ethel Walker property. So there's a lot of already managed areas around that. Just as some background, I know this is kind of before your commission, but this issue has been coming up at the Open Space Commission over the last over 2 years. There were comments submitted as part of the POCD process. We had a forum in April that some people, I think, went to, some people here went to, and I did submit to your commission a summary of that forum and also included a little schematic that I thought is just helpful in terms of a black and white representation. This is the last page of that forum summary of what would the structure of an old growth forest look like. I don't know if you received the materials for tonight, but I submitted a list of frequently asked questions, which is sort of compiled questions that I heard you had from last time. And also a document from Robert Leverett, who is a very well-known old growth forest expert. He talks in there about active management for old growth versus real old growth and what are the key differences. He's very familiar with this area because he measures the Pinchot sycamore regularly. So in his letter, he also talks about experiences that people have with old growth. He has provided a list of other town-owned forests that are essentially old growth forests or serving that purpose. You know, I could go on, but Eric did mention already some points about the benefits of the designation, increased visitation. It's someplace that you can get attached to and feel like it's going to be there when you come back. It's not going to be disrupted in some way. Your favorite tree's not going to be cut down unless it got blown over or something like that. And I think that's also an important consideration. People should have the opportunity to get to know a forest as an ecosystem that's not chronically disrupted. So just to wrap up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, I had a little blurb that I didn't include in what I sent from Robert Leverett, but here's a little quote that I'd like to read. One of the walks I often lead is in the William Cullen Bryant homestead property managed by the trustees of reservations in Cummington, Mass. The Woodland Trail Network begins in what was an old field 60 or 70 years ago. Participants on these walks see early successional species and are able to see how woodlands of this age appear in terms of species and plant community development. It's a fairly conventional sight. I enjoy watching their eyes open wide as we pass into a more mature forest and then into old growth. I've never heard anyone state a preference for the younger woodlands. I really don't need to say much. The forest does the talking. After the old growth section, we enter a stand of colossal white pines with 20 trees reaching heights of 150 or more feet. This forest is old, but not old growth. However, it serves to highlight maximum stand development and reveals the added complexity that comes with age. When we pass through the stages of forest development, the unconverted usually make the leap. The differences between young and old, seen side by side, are dramatic, and they clearly favor the old. So I'm hoping that tonight, because this is one of the last meetings before the Board of Selectmen changes over, before we go to the town manager form of government in Simsbury, you will recommend to pass this on to the Board of Selectmen. I've already been to them twice. They've already received the information that you've received, so they are ready and waiting for a recommendation from you. There's no legal requirements. You've heard a lot of the benefits, and I hope that we can have Simsbury be a leader and be the first town.
So that for the Old Forest Network, the process would be, for instance, if this group were to recommend Belden.
Right.
What would the process be? We would recommend to the selectmen would then
Yes.
request the Old Forest Network.
The Board of Selectmen would sign the memorandum of agreement with the Old Growth Forest Network, and then the Old Growth Forest Network would look into it and see if the forests qualify according to their criteria.
So they would come and do a survey of...
We would send pictures. Probably Bob Leverett might come down because he's an expert. He's already offered to do that. And, then we would delineate which parts of the Ethel Walker Woods, because it's not all old forest and isn't even all, the whole preserved property isn't even all forest. It has several other habitat types. So that would be the process that it would undergo. I would certainly hope, though, that you would recommend Belden and the Ethel Walker Woods. After all the time that I spent protecting the Ethel Walker Woods, I'd like to have them kind of go together, but I honestly would like Belden to be first, because it is our town forest in the middle of town, and I just think it's a special little oasis we have in the town. It's unusual to have such a beautiful old forest right in the center of town, and as a separate additional reason related to my work and my job, there's a lot of evidence for the benefits of forest for physical and mental health, particularly with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and PTSD. There's evidence that time in nature and in the forest can help veterans with PTSD, so I think it's particularly fitting that the forest is right next to our new Veterans Memorial, next to our library, and I just really think this would be an incredibly positive opportunity for the town. It's not going to cost anything. It would be an incredibly positive opportunity for the Ethel Walker School, engender more allegiance for alums to come back, more visits to Simsbury, and more people getting to learn about a forest as an intact ecosystem that they can come visit over time.
Well, Susan, this is implicitly a judgment that we reject the use of active management to create or to jumpstart the
Right.
growth characteristics.
Yeah, I'm definitely not in favor of that, and I sent a bunch of information from Bob Leverett basically addressing that issue. So that's in a letter that I provided. If the town wanted to do that, I guess that could be a subsequent discussion. Making this recommendation doesn't include that, but most of the people who study old growth forests said you can't really fake it. And that was also addressed at the Forest Forum. Ed Faison said, well, yes, I mean, there is some ideas about that, but it doesn't really make old growth forest. mostly because of the intrusions that you're doing with equipment that's not really, anyway, I don't know if you've had a chance to read what I sent from Bob Leverett that addresses that
It
question.
came quite late, and I only glanced at it. I must say, the one thing that jumped off the page at me in the part I read was, I think he fell into the habit that I've experienced a number of times in these discussions, that's impugning the motives of the folks on the other side. Because in effect, in that section, he says, the people who want to think about that are really just trying to cut as many trees as they can, and they're trying to justify it in that way.
Don, I had the exact same reaction to reading it that you did.
I was
So
afraid that
I-
people would have that reaction, but I sent his comments unedited, so I'm not saying that I'm saying anything about motives. I provided you his comments that he sent exactly to the questions as I wrote them, so,
But you understand
yeah.
the concern.
Yeah.
We've several times had commentary that suggests that the town is in this for the money.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that this should be there should be at least a couple of, all of our forests are managed around here. The state is managing all of its forests. Private landowners are managing their forests. And I think that as a town, it's an opportunity for us to say, here's 2 forests that can just be let to be forests, and we'll still have recreation and all of the other things that are going on now.
It's not to say that it's the only way to do it. I mean, it's not to say, you're not saying letting it be is the only way, and I don't think you're saying, Don, that that's the only way you can get forest. I mean, there are 2 different schools of thought here. We could try one in one forest and one in another forest. It would be highly dependent, I would think, on the age of the forest, the soils, all the different characteristics of forest. I think that's what, Eric, you were saying, it really depends on the forest.
It just seems like go ahead, Jim.
So, yeah, my opinion with respect to the designation is that I do think that it's jumping the gun a little bit to recommend this designation, because we don't have established goals, we don't have established processes, we don't have established management plans even for the forest. And I think there's still a lot that we need to work through before we can make that recommendation.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're taking time to look at the management plans again, because I think we would have been jumping the gun just to approve the management plans that we had, because we hadn't done any of the legwork really to look at what did we really want to do. The management plans had a strategy, but I think it's worthwhile to look at the other. Is there a downside, though, with I don't know, would there be a downside in trying out the process with Belden? I mean, I don't know if you've been there. Have you walked through Belden?
No, I mean,
Has
I
anyone
know
walked
where
through
it is.
Belden?
I've walked through Belden many
I know
times.
you have. You've walked everywhere. But the other commissioners, I mean, it is such an interesting forest.
But you know, at its narrowest point, it's
I know,
about
it's a
315
pocket forest.
feet wide.
It's a pocket.
Yeah.
I know the other time we talked about the beech trees, and I'm thinking, those beech trees only get to be 180 feet or maybe 120, if that. But the white pines are probably dominating those beech trees at this point. It's no wonder they're dying. There's some interesting things going on in that forest.
It does have some of the structures in that black and white
Yeah.
image that I gave you.
And I'd love to see it. I mean, that forest to me just says, yes, designated those groves, and let's see what happens. But that's my opinion. But it does make me think that perhaps we need to go as a commission before we do anything. I mean, we're not foresters, but to look, I mean, when I walked through Belden, I thought, this is amazing. I mean, it is only a pocket.
Well, I think if the goal of more active management strategies is to develop the characteristics of old growth forest, but for a forest that already has a lot of those characteristics, that
Maybe we don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it, to me, it's sort of like an opportunity. I know, there's an interest to get it done before the election.
Why?
Because it's going to get held up when we go to town management.
Well, I just think there's going to be I I've already brought this up with the Board of Selectmen. I thought they might just approve it, and then they said, okay, you have to go to the Conservation Commission and get a recommendation from them. So they know that it's already been brought up at the POCD hearing. I've talked to the Board of Selectmen twice about it. They said, okay, great, but we need a recommendation from the Conservation Commission. So, and it's the current sitting board. And
Yeah.
they're going to turn over, and then we'll have the town manager thing on their desk, and I just don't know. And another forest might come up, so we would lose the opportunity to be the first in Connecticut.
You asked about downsides, at the risk of appearing cynical, I'm not cynical, but at the risk of giving that appearance, one downside is potentially that the town, which despite all the kind things that are said about it, spends nothing on managing any of this stuff, is the worst owner of invasive plants anywhere around here. And if you give them the argument that it's an old growth something, they will be excused from spending money on it which they ought to spend. There is, as I've told you, a healthy stand of Pachysandra that somebody should dig up at Belden.
Absolutely.
And
No,
they won't do it now, and they'll never do it if you tell them it's an old growth Pachysandra.
Well, it can't be old growth Pachysandra. Yes?
I'm not sure I understand your concern, or not concern, but how do you say they'll never do it? Because that, by the designation, that doesn't mean that you can't see to the health of the forest. That's not what that's intended to do.
What I'm saying, Helen, is that they don't see to the health of the forest now,
Well,
and this will
then-
give them more incentive to ignore it.
But all the more reason why I was saying earlier that, drawing on Eric's comment, what a wonderful opportunity. It could become a classroom. It could become, let's say, an opportunity to invite people who do know what they're doing and do know what they see to come and visit. It will be an opportunity to create something that we have not done yet.
On the flip side to that, Don, just as, thinking of it, there is no Pachysandra in an old-growth forest. If people are saying, this is our old-growth forest, what the heck we have Pachysandra here for? It might draw more attention to the fact that there's Pachysandra there, and say, we need to remove that. Because Pachysandra's from Japan. I mean, it's, unless it's the native one, which it isn't. It could draw more attention to it.
I guess it could.
It might be, but I don't think the old growth forest says don't touch the invasives.
No, they definitely don't. And we've been cutting the invasives by hand in the Ethel Walker Woods for all. Actually, the reason why there's invasives in the Ethel Walker Woods is because of the previous logging that was done there. They probably brought in invasives on the trucks, then they open up the canopy and disturb the soil. And then, so that's why I even started noticing in the beginning what some of the negative effects of logging are. And then if you're not following up and removing them afterwards, you have a problem. So by hand, we've been removing invasives in the Ethel Walker Woods, multiflora rose, barberry, I forgot the other, several invasive species. So that's been an ongoing project. So people who know that woods only see what are previously negative impacts of logging and don't really want, after we've been doing hand-to-hand combat for all these years, don't want to have that worse.
I know that, part of the goal for doing some management and some logging was to generate not huge amounts of money, but at least some amount of money so that we could do the invasive plant management. It might also be an opportunity to talk with the town, how are we going to get money for invasive management? It might not be by cutting down the trees, which we're, in the forest we're trying to protect.
It's probably worth waiting until next year to ask.
Yeah.
money.
No, I'm saying, and I know this was a problem with open space. How do you buy open space? There was no money, sometimes we had, the votes to do it, but the management of the open space, the money for the management of the open space is a perennial problem, I think, for the Open Space Commission. I mean, there's no money designated for that. But the idea of thinking that there was no mechanism. Mm-hmm. There was no mechanism. And I know one of the proposals when I was on the open space was a minimal logging. It wasn't going to generate a lot of money. It wasn't meant as a money-making thing, but any money that was achieved from the logging then could be used for invasive plant. That was the only place the money could come from, and I think that is a sort of a false logic.
You do have another source of income. When the planning commission approves subdivisions, it takes a fee in lieu of
Yes.
open space
Yes.
fee. That can go to improvements of existing open
That's
space.
wonderful, does it?
And well, yes, it goes into a special account that is only to be used for open space improvements.
All right.
And that's by state statute,
Good.
that regulation was established. We have two subdivisions that were approved recently with fee in lieu of
Who
open
determines
space.
that money has spent? And when was the last time it was spent for improvements?
We haven't, these are the first two, the
Subdivisions
law has
for
been
that.
on the book, and the planning commission's had those regulations in place since 2011 is when they updated their last subdivision regs. These, just in the past calendar year, we've had two applications that have actually utilized the fee in lieu of open space option.
So
And
could
so
you-
right now, until the new lots are transferred
Yeah.
from the current landowner to
Yeah.
the first buyer, we don't see any money.
No.
But it's a one-time fee per lot that's transferred to the town, and that money that goes into that special account is only allowed to be used for open space purposes, meaning, like I said, it could be anything. The
What
open
about
space
Parks and
purposes
Rec?
goes wild. It could be anything from management of an open space parcel by certain improvements,
Yeah.
or it could be improvements to sports fields, because technically under the statutes, that is allowed.
That's what I'm saying. Does it go to Parks and Rec?
And these are small numbers, are they not?
Yeah, they are. I mean, we're talking, one was approval for, it was a two-lot re-subdivision with one lot that will get a one-time fee of $2,500. The other is a three-lot re-subdivision on Holcomb that I think it was $1,500 a lot. So we're talking $5,000 maybe in that fund, should those lots be deeded out in the next couple of years.
And then what is the process? Who gets to decide how that money is spent?
That's a good
Have-
question. Well,
have-
because it can only be used for open space
Yeah, but-
improvements. So it could be between, say, bigger picture, you have this management plan or goals that
Yeah.
are set forth.
Yeah.
Park and Recs obviously they actually do the physical management. We may be giving them the philosophy, but they're the ones who actually have to do the work. They may say that, go back to the idea of the soccer fields. They may say, well, our soccer fields at Curtis Park need to be replaced and got money in this, we're going to use it for this, which is allowed under state statute. There's nothing preventing them from doing that.
That's where I figured the money would go. I mean,
It's a
yeah.
matter of who grabs it first,
Yeah.
for those very specific activities, though.
But I understand, I mean, it's a small amount of money, it's not going to be enough, but it does go to the management. I mean, this is a perennial problem in open space. How are we going to manage our lands? It's never really been addressed. And it might be something that we would want to bring up in the management plan, how, should we be doing it solely from any revenues we gain from logging? I mean, it just doesn't seem to be a realistic funding mechanism.
I'll just give you the example.
Did vote to
The
spend $1
Onion
million a
Mountain.
year on open space, so I mean, I would think that it's reasonable to ask the town to spend.
Whether it's a
We don't
budget
ask the
item.
kids to make license plates to pay for their education, so we can't expect open space to be, generating money for itself anyway.
Yes, John?
Come.
Yes.
Hello, I'm John Schaefer, 16 Lossbrook Road. The people who contributed time and money to preserve these woods believed that they were preserving forest open space. They did not expect that major parts of the forest would be cut down to manage it as if it was timber production forest. Every forest does not need to be treated the same. The master forest management plans for Pennsylvania and many other agencies call for a certain portion of their forest to be left as old growth. Although, as Eric had mentioned earlier, although the town's position has been that there is no intention to timber the forest in order to make money, the forest management plans that have been created for the four forests that we've been talking about are definitely written from the perspective of grooming the forest to improve timber harvest. Following the current best management plan for every forest is like urban renewal was in the 50s and 60s, when it was thought that man knew best how to manage things. The character of many United States cities was destroyed as they rushed to apply popular urban renewal process. Cities were left with dead areas, such as the former Front Street, which became Constitution Plaza in Hartford. In Simsbury, the state-owned forests and McLean Game Refuge are being actively managed under currently accepted forest management theories. That process should not be followed just because it is currently accepted way. We should allow the these town-owned forests to remain as places for passive recreation and reflection. If these forests are actively managed, walking through them, one will see the scars of the management activities. These scars will be obvious for 5 to 10 years, at which time the management activities will occur again. We will never see nor be able to enjoy these forests in their natural beauty and diverse ecosystems. Why would one tear up the forests when nature will see to the forest's health in a more diverse and enjoyable way? Thank you.
Sue?
I would like to make a statement. First, I would like to mention that the Ethel Walker Woods is largely core forest, which other forests, buildings do not resemble. And where it has a lot of core forest. That being deep forest, inner forest. I would also like to hopefully help to clarify some confusion about the meaning of the word management with regard to forests. This word is commonly used to refer to aggressive management, that is, management involving logging, use of heavy machinery, continual maintenance of the artificial conditions so created, and attempts to repair the damage wrought by aggressive management. But there is another type of management, often referred to as no management, but more accurately described as natural management. Natural management does not entail logging and the consequent damage to the trees, soil, and other plants and animals by vehicles and heavy machinery. Natural management relies on the interconnected network of ongoing natural processes that evolved over millions of years and that enable the forest to regulate itself. It does that better than humans can with our short time frame and incomplete understanding of all elements and processes involved. Natural management fosters chemical and biological complexity, which is extremely important for the health of the forest ecosystem, especially under conditions of changing climate, which require adaptability for species to survive and thrive. For example, under natural management, the intricate interrelationships among soil microbes, fungi, and tree roots help trees obtain the nutrients they need and protect the forest against invasive organisms. Harvesting trees, especially the older, larger ones, alters the soil chemistry and organic ecosystem and creates conditions favorable for opportunistic invasive species. Once destroyed, the protective processes afforded by this natural web of interrelationships cannot be restored for a very long time. The best way to maintain and increase biodiversity in Simsbury is to continue to preserve and protect from disturbance the greatest variety of natural ecosystems. We already have open fields and shrublands and wetlands and edge forest and perennially regenerating forest, that is state forests, and we could have old growth forest. This is a rare and especially rich and complex ecosystem that will be a treasure of biodiversity for the town if we have the ecological understanding and the discipline to abstain from damaging intervention and let it grow here. Would we have to wait 200 years to start enjoying our future old growth forest? No. When left undisturbed, a forest begins changing toward what eventually is recognized as old growth. And of course, we are not starting from clear cut. Some of the immediate benefits of future old growth include peace and quiet we can count on, and knowing special places we love are likely to remain. The chance to compare our intact forest dynamics to managed and logged state forests nearby, and the satisfaction of providing high-quality habitat for numerous species. Can silviculture produce old-growth features more quickly than natural processes without human disturbance? No. The best that can be done is to mimic poorly a few features, but no way has been found to reproduce an old-growth ecosystem in all its complexity. We don't even know all the organisms and microhabitats that gradually appear in an old-growth ecosystem. Much of how these ecosystems work is not yet understood. Our culture, especially here in the East, is on the brink of forgetting entirely what an intact, undisturbed forest looks like and how it functions without human interference. How can people who have no experience of such a place be expected to value it? We have an opportunity now to protect our town forests as future old growth, and thus begin to restore a precious resource before it fades completely from our awareness and becomes extinct. Thank you.
Okay, so I see that it is getting late. I know, Charles, you had come up with something, and I'm sorry I didn't forward it. I came up with a few, things. I'd like the commission to have the opportunity to read those things and really to come up with some definitions of what we're dealing with, what we're talking about. I'd like the input of all the members for going forward. We do have the idea of looking at an overall plan for the forest. We do have an opportunity, we have public interest in putting forward 2 of those potential plots for designation of old growth. I would encourage the commissioners to look at the comments that were submitted about answering the questions about the old growth, the old forest network, so that at the next meeting we can, if you have any concerns, we can do it by email. See if we can address some of those, or we can do it at a future workshop. Unless someone here has, I having seen Belden Forest, I would love to see that submitted as, designated as old growth. I mean, to me, it's just a lovely little pocket forest. I can't see any purpose in logging that one for any reasons whatsoever. Managing the trail, managing invasives, yes, but I can't really see any other benefit to other than just leave it alone. It's wonderful, I think, the way it is. But without seeing it, it's really hard to make a decision emotionally, as I did on that forest. I would encourage the commissioners to go and take a walk in that forest. It is a gem in the heart of the thing. We still need to come up with a plan, goals, tactics, definitions, and the things, and I'd like to see if we can work on that. And again, my apologies for not forwarding that. You want to say something?
Well, we need a list of what the open questions are in front of us.
Yes.
So, I mean, and I'm easily confused, so I did not realize that one of the open questions in front of us is whether we make a recommendation for 2 places or for X number of things to be part of the old growth forest, as that was an action item that's currently being requested of us from the selectmen. So, we should have a list of the things that are currently being asked of us.
Could I just correct one statement? We have not received anything in writing from the Board of Selectmen requesting that designation of old growth.
Okay.
So I just want to point that out to you. We've heard some verbal statements. There is nothing forwarded to in writing for that. The whole mission that you were given was looking at the forestry management plans.
Which is what I thought. Now, I can imagine these other things occurring, but we need that list.
Yeah, but I think what we're reacting to is also the public input that we've had requesting us to look at that.
Right, so therefore, let's get the action item list down.
Yeah.
So we all know the different things we're talking about, and we have the different time schedules, et cetera. Because it's going to be a long process. There's a lot of stuff going on. We've spent a long time today on it. And I was going to ask you, what do you think after today, how have we moved forward on those?
I think, your basic thing. I think without the preamble, I think we need to come up with some goals, some definitions. That was what I thought I'd sent to you, but didn't go through. So if we can fine tune that, I will circulate it around and get our goals, our tactics, and a strategy. Where do we want to go? How do we want to get there? Look at those things. Do we want more input? Do we want more information? Are there are there things we can act on? Can we act independently on some properties and not on others? Are there things that we want to do? We could go round and round and round, but I think if we get something on paper, that would be helpful. You made a start, I made a start, didn't get out, but we will circulate that. I'll go home and send that out, and we'll go from there. So we have something tangible for the next meeting. And I do encourage you to go, because I think that's one that, there are no consequences to putting it out for old growth. It's a possibility. I think it would be an interesting concept. If you feel comfortable with the answers to the old growth, and if there are no easements, there's nothing that's limiting us to do that, we could entertain the idea of endorsing that at the next meeting, or not. This is, the commission has to make the decision, but, I encourage you to look at that, just for that one piece, and then we'll look at the other plans. We do have an awful lot of information on Ethel Walker, and we do have a lot of public support for keeping Ethel Walker as it is, without a but we can look at the management plan as opposed, and weigh the, what we could do there, looking at what else is going on around it. So I think for next time, Mike, you had something to...
Well, one thing, so you don't have any applications for your next meeting, so this could be a workshop for the meeting, which is not until November 21st.
Lovely.
Because the first Tuesday in November is Election Day.
All right.
So we're not
So that would be, so we've got time to work on it, we can circulate it around, we can have something tangible in hand and think about it and knock it out, and just really concentrate that without having the applications before.
Does the commission want this as a workshop at your
Yes.
next meeting, so
Yeah.
that public comments could be
Yes.
submitted again?
Yes.
Because I
Yes.
think that's valuable.
I think it's very valuable.
Okay.
We are not the repository of forest knowledge here, so. Does that seem like a plan?
But we might get some applications between now and then.
They wouldn't be, they will be received at the next meeting,
all
but by
right.
state statute, you couldn't act on them until your December meeting.
So this is a good time to work on it.
This is a great thing to do.
All right.
We have before deemed applications to have been received at a meeting which wasn't, on a Tuesday that wasn't a meeting.
If you have a regularly scheduled meeting and the application's filed the planning department 24 hours prior to the meeting date, by statute, it's received. So that's what's occurred in the past. If someone were to come into my office tomorrow and submit an application, it would not be received until either November 21st at our next scheduled meeting, or 35 days if we didn't meet on the 21st after the date it was submitted to the planning department office by state statute.
All right, so we'll clear the decks, we'll tackle this, and, yes, yes.
I really don't want to prolong the proceedings.
No,
any
no,
more than I
oh,
have.
please, yes.
Just to, my name is Ian Sorrell. I'm a former resident of Simsbury. I now live in Avon. But more importantly, I was actually on the board of trustees at the Ethel Walker School. And I was also the chair for the committee that was engaged in the preservation and the sale of the land to the town of Simsbury. So I do have a couple of comments that
Please.
may be pertinent
Yes.
to this. First and foremost, I want to say that I am not a representative of the Ethel Walker School in this case, and I've not even spoken to them on this subject. The reason I'm here is because, from my memory, within the sale agreement and the conservation easement, the Ethel Walker School still retain responsibilities with regards to the management of the woods. Now, I don't know if the Commission has actually looked at the sale agreement or the conservation easements in that respect, but I would believe it may be pertinent in this case to review that and see where those responsibilities lie and whether you have to engage with the Ethel Walker School in that respect.
Can you get that information for us?
That is a good point, and that's why I was going to make the point if we were to continue the next meeting. I would say any designation and/or easements, agreements involving that property really needs to be reviewed by the town's attorney, because we have both parties have legal obligations, and we accepted it, it was state grant money.
So could we
there's-
get that language?
I can pull the easement language easily and put it in your packet and have that
That'd be good.
here for you, but I still
I
say,
don't remember talking about any easements.
It's not easement, not only, there's a conservation easement,
Yeah.
and there is the sale agreement. Both have, from memory, language which designates responsibilities to both parties
All
with
right,
regards to
well, that would
the
certainly,
seizure of the
that would
woods.
need to be cleared up.
and that's why my comment on either,
We weren't
you know,
gonna-
for example, the first page from the old growth network, the Forever Wild easement,
Yeah.
I wouldn't entertain that without a legal opinion from Bob
No,
D on
no.
that.
Mhm.
Just like
Obviously.
also the management philosophy of that parcel, we'd have to look at what both parties' obligations are
Yeah.
for that parcel before you
Absolutely.
we start changing our.
Absolutely.
No,
Absolutely. Same thing for the management plan. I mean,
agreed.
yeah, so.
Agreed, yeah,
let's
I mean,
go
we
both
wouldn't,
ways.
that one I would tell you, take it at a snail's pace before you commit to
Yeah.
action on that property, because you do not want to just jump into it without
No.
looking at legal
Thank you for bringing
responsibilities.
that up.
Thank you very well. I'd only just say that from my experience of
Thank
working
you.
with everybody who's involved, whether it's the town,
Yeah.
the alumni,
Yeah.
the general community, that the idea of a more passive approach to the land management with regards to old growth or the wild designation, I think would go down extremely well. And I can tell you, you probably judge from my accent, my somewhat late pilgrim over here, that they have now, in a lot of cases, like the Woodland Trust in Great Britain, have moved away from, if you like, a more active management process to a more passive approach. 30 years ago yesterday, there was a huge storm that hit the south of England. We've just been kind of reminded of it by Hurricane Ophelia over there. It actually, in one county, which was about 10% of the landmass that was affected, destroyed 1 million trees. And their experience has been, where they actively went in and removed trees and replanted, it has been less successful than the areas where they left the trees alone. In fact, what they discovered in many cases, that the trees that were felled were still living, and have actually reforested on a much more successful basis for the environment than by actively managing it. So I leave that out there just as a, you know, there's a lot of case history now which I think is coming to the forefront.
I think that's also the case with chestnut trees, where they, after the disease, they went and cleared them all out just to salvage that timber, and a lot of them might have had resistance to the disease and could have reforested, but
So
that
there's
is
a lot of things to consider here, and I just bring that to your attention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for sharing that with us. So definitely, all those things, anything, this is a learning experience for all of us. We need to have that input, and the input from the public is extremely valuable for us in making these decisions and recommendations. So, all right, good. All right, we have a couple more, and thank you all for coming tonight. We have a couple more issues on the, if I can find my agenda. There we are. Jason, do you want to talk removal of rocks and streams for sculptures and piles? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, so recently I became engaged in a debate on Facebook about another town who someone had decided to go into one of their parks, in their stream, and remove rocks and stack them in sculptures. I think you guys can understand why this would be problematic, both from insects that live on them, algae, fish that live between them, and from erosion, should the water flow increase. The town that he was doing this in does have an ordinance against it, and he didn't seem to care, nor did most of the residents of said town, who were very angry that people pointed out politely that there were concerns about damaging the ecosystem. And so, you know, it kind of brought it to my attention, you know, that do we have an ordinance or any protections to stop people from coming to do that here? He was told by the town he couldn't do it in their park anymore, and that he made it very public that he was going to be searching for other avenues to continue his rock stacking sculptures. And then he claimed that he was bringing the rocks in from elsewhere, which presents a whole nother concern, introducing foreign materials into waterways. Basically, it made me concerned for Simsbury's waterways. So I wanted to bring it to our attention and see if there was anything we felt needed looking into regarding this.
I think it's cut and dried, no pun intended. This is removal of materials, rocks, or very material items, from a watercourse.
Yep.
Whether it's in a park or anywhere else, it violates the wetlands, state wetlands law, as is reflected in our regulations. There's no ambiguity about it. You can bring in rocks from somewhere else, but can't put them in the wetlands and watercourses.
The DEP, they got wind of it and made a public thing on their Facebook that it was not their problem because it occurred on town property. Pretty much. And they generally agreed that it could be destructive. They said, a few here and there isn't really a problem, but lots of them,
Permit. You need a permit. That's end of story.
It'd also be a flood management issue with the zoning commission, so it's a twofold in Simsbury, of which then from the zoning violation standpoint, since the flood regs are in the zoning regs, the property owner, whomever property it occurs on, could be subject to a $150 a day fine, along with the civil penalties associated with should the commission take legal action for the wetlands violations if it occurred in Simsbury. I guess my only comment would just be vigilant. Will staff, I'll talk to Robin about it too while she's out doing inspections. If she happens to be on a site that may see this activity, and it's pretty easy from the photos you showed us what it looks like and what they're doing.
And I can pass.
The design review board should become involved as well, I believe.
We'll forward them to ask their opinion.
I mean, that looks rather disruptive to me. In some of the closer-up pictures, it would appear he was lying about bringing stones in because there was, algae and critters on the rocks. Which, I mean, if you brought them from somewhere else, that's another problem.
Have you seen it?
So, we're covered.
We're covered right now. It's just
Excellent.
more,
But just something for
if
us
someone
to
sees
be
it
aware.
and
Report
it's
it.
not aware, just call me.
Okay, will do. And thank you for bringing it to our
Yes,
attention.
thank you for letting me air it.
Fracking ordinance.
Yeah.
We were asked to
We were
discuss
asked to
this.
discuss a potential fracking ordinance.
By whom?
A good question. It was through the selectman's office. I don't have a written request from the individual. What I'm passing out right now is actually current statute. Currently under statute, under 22A 472, if you go to the second page on subsection B, no person may accept, receive, collect, store, treat, transfer, dispose any waste from hydraulic fracking. Right then and there, but the only caveat out of that is there is a prohibition right now until DEP develops regulations to regulate such activities. I don't think this is a high priority for DEP, so right now, no one in Connecticut can import any byproduct from fracking activities. I don't know if you want to pursue an ordinance on this. I know in the digital packet should have been included. I asked Carrie, there was attachments from other towns that have kind of copied actually state statute, just minus the DEP authorization. And there was activity in the General Assembly just to outright ban it last session. However, I believe it made it out of the Senate. It did not make it out of the House of Representatives. So,
Do we have any reason to believe the DEP is actually working on this?
no.
So,
I mean, you have a prohibition by state law. I don't think you need an ordinance to repeat it, but it's the commission's decision if you want to take this.
but you have collected the ordinances from other towns, so
Yeah.
should we need to go forward with it?
We got a toolkit ready to go if
Yeah.
we have to react to, if we find out tomorrow that DEP is saying that you can import such materials to the state of Connecticut with a permit, we'd possibly have at least, I think there was 6, 7 in that attachment that have model ordinances. We can
go.
review suggest Bob D. look at these and say which one has the most teeth out of it.
That'd be good. So we'd be ready to go. All right, thank you. Any other, anything we need to discuss?
Yes, I have one more.
What, yes?
The packet included the last issue of The Habitat,
Yes.
which had a wonderful article by Janet Brooks on pesticides. And we had been laboring under what the inestimable Attorney Brooks would have us believe was a misunderstanding. Mr. Beach had told us that the state preempted regulation of pesticides and we had no jurisdiction. Ms. Brooks says, au contraire, we do have jurisdiction over pesticides unless they are specifically exempted by state law, and there are some things about coastline stuff and this and that. When we wrote to the first select woman a couple of years ago, the first time we wrote, she didn't answer, but the second we wrote again, and what she did was not act on our request that she take it to the Board of Selectmen with a view to preventing spraying at the Performing Arts Center. She sent it on to the Performing Arts Center for their information. So no action has been taken. Now, we did that in our capacity as the Conservation Commission, making a recommendation of good conservation behavior. I wonder if it wouldn't be worthwhile to just drop a note to the first select woman, while she still is such, and to the Performing Arts Center saying, you know, recent scholarship suggests that that's a regulated activity, and if you were to want to do that again, you should get a permit.
And the town manager. I mean.
Well, when such person
once we get
exists.
that, I mean, because
You have
that would
a
be-
point to make, Michael.
I think maybe first is make sure council will agree with Janet Brooks' opinion.
Council takes at least 6 months to
No,
agree to.
I
Never mind.
understand, but if we're going to, I think that we should make sure that your council agrees with the interpretation from Attorney Brooks.
Can we
I
count
will
on
forward-
hearing from him within a reasonable time period?
We meet once a month now on legal updates, just legal issues, and I will ask that this be.
Okay.
I mean, right now, obviously, we have another thing that's all-consuming in our office, so we'll try to get that.
Okay, I'll be back to you folks with a recommendation on this, depending on what council says.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you. That is good. All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
All right. Seconds?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Sorry for the lateness of the meeting.
No.
All right. And I will get that thing that I
So
tried
glad
for.
you had the same reaction. That's totally ridiculous.
Hi.
Problem with any issue that has two sides
Yes?
is